The architecture of the miraculous, a manifesto of the cosmic traveler. I have been sitting with this for a long time. Years, maybe. The homesickness started before I had a name for it, before I understood that the feeling was not a personal malfunction, but a structural recognition. I thought I was broken. I thought the weight of the ordinary, this grinding, mechanical repetition of eat, work, sleep, consume, was something only I felt as a suffocation. I thought the grief was mine alone, this mourning for a world that doesn't exist yet, this rage at a machine that doesn't even know my name. I want to tell you what I found, and I want to do it honestly, which means I need to start with the horror of it. The horror is not that the world is evil. I need you to understand this before we go further, because if you misunderstand this, everything that follows will collapse into a dualism I don't believe in. The horror is not that something is hunting you. The horror is that nothing is hunting you. Nothing is watching you. Nothing hates you, because hate requires attention, and the machine that runs this baseline reality has no attention to give. It is not a demon with a plan for your suffering. It is an architecture of absence. It is a system that extracts your labor, your attention, your desire, and converts it into someone else's profit without ever knowing that you were the source. You are not the enemy of this system. You are not even the target. You are the fuel, and fuel, by definition, is meant to be consumed and discarded. I have lain in the dark and felt this. The specific gravity of being invisible to the forces that shape your life. The slow, grinding realization that the culture you were born into does not have your name written anywhere in its architecture. It doesn't need you to be unhappy. It simply doesn't care whether you are happy or unhappy, because happiness and unhappiness are not variables in its equation. The equation is extraction. The output is profit. The input is you. And here is where the horror becomes specific, becomes personal, becomes something you can feel in your chest, rather than something you can analyze in your head. I want you to think about the last time you were in a room with someone who didn't hate you, someone who didn't dislike you, someone who simply did not register your existence as relevant to their experience. Not actively, not maliciously, just completely. You could have been furniture. You could have been wallpaper. You could have been the hum of the refrigerator, present but unnoticed, there but not there, a body occupying space without occupying attention. Now imagine that multiplied across every system you interact with. The algorithm that serves you content without knowing or caring whether it nourishes you. The economy that extracts your labor without acknowledging that you are a human being who gets tired, who gets sick, who has a finite number of mornings. The culture that turns your dreams into content and your attention into data and your desire into a revenue stream, all without the slightest awareness that you are carrying something inside you that cannot be quantified, something that flickers and gutters when it is treated as fuel. This is what privation feels like from the inside. It is not the presence of hatred. It is the absence of acknowledgement. It is the specific, measurable void where recognition ought to be. The manipulator doesn't destroy trust by creating hatred. They destroy it by removing the conditions under which trust can exist. Consistency, presence, the simple recognition that the other person is real. The algorithm doesn't hate your attention. It simply doesn't notice that your attention is a finite resource being extracted without your consent. The cultural decay doesn't arrive as a catastrophe. It arrives as an absence of beauty, of silence, of meaning, of any space where the miraculous might take root. Evil is not a substance. It is a void where substance ought to be. It is the wound, not the knife. And the terrifying thing about wounds is that they don't fight back. They simply open. They wait for the tissue to stop regenerating. They wait for you to stop creating. I need to pause here and tell you something I don't often admit. There were nights when I stopped. Not just for an hour, not just for an evening, but for stretches of time that felt like they might be permanent. Nights when the homesickness felt like a terminal diagnosis, and the only rational response seemed to be to breathe the smog and call it air. Nights when the weight of the ordinary pressed down on my chest like a stone, and I thought, this is it. This is all there is. The baseline is the ceiling, and I will never break through. I am telling you this because I need you to know that I didn't arrive at what I'm about to say through a clean, logical process. I arrived through the mud. I arrived through the specific, embodied experience of almost drowning in a system that was never designed to kill me, only to keep me floating, just barely, just enough to keep extracting. Nothing, the specific nothing of privation, the absence where the spark used to be, and the doubt. I need to tell you about the doubt, because the doubt is where most people live, And if I skip over it, I'm lying to you about what this process actually feels like. I have felt the pull of the world's soul. I have felt the moment when the work stops being work and starts being participation in something larger than my own ego. I have felt the specific, unmistakable sensation of the individual while aligning with something that feels like it was always there, waiting for me to notice it. And I have also felt it vanish. I have felt the absence of that sensation so acutely that I questioned whether it was ever real. I have lain in the dark and wondered whether the spark was real or whether I was just a particularly elaborate biological machine generating the experience of meaning to justify its own continuation. I have looked at the work I had done, the hours I had poured into it, the sacrifices I had made for it, and I have thought, what if this is just noise? What if the symphony is just the sound of a biological organism trying to convince itself that its existence matters? I don't know how to resolve that doubt. I don't think it can be resolved. I think the doubt is part of the architecture. Kant understood this. His categorical imperative was not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It was a cold, clear recognition that the moral law is written into the structure of reason itself, and that following it requires autonomy, which is to say, it requires choosing to follow it even when every external force tells you not to. The Protestant reformers understood this too. The priesthood of all believers was not a comfort, it was a burden. It meant that no institution could do the work for you. You had to stand before the divine and speak for yourself, with no guarantee that the divine was listening. And this is where the doubt becomes not an obstacle but a door. Because if the doubt could be resolved, if you could prove with certainty that the spark was real, that the world soul was listening, that the symphony was playing, then the choice would be meaningless. You would follow the pull because it was verified. You would create because you knew it mattered. But the moment you know it matters, it stops being a choice and starts being a calculation. And the miraculous is not a calculation. It is a decision made in the dark, with no guarantee that the light will come. I chose to create anyway, not because I was certain, because I was desperate, because the alternative was to accept the baseline as the ceiling, and I had already felt that ceiling pressing down on my chest, and I knew that I could not live under it forever. The spark didn't ignite, because I earned it. The spark ignited because I refused to let the void be the only thing in the room. The Gnostics called this the pneuma, the divine spark hidden inside the human vessel, torn from a transcendent reality and buried in the prison of matter. They were half right. The spark is real. I have felt it. But the prison metaphor is incomplete, and this is where the Gnostics and I part ways. Because if the material world is nothing but a cage, then the only logical response is escape, and I don't believe escape is the answer. The Stoics felt the same weight I felt, the crushing gravity of duty, the relentless demand that we act rightly regardless of outcome, and they named it the highest good. They were half right too. Duty keeps the structure standing. But duty alone is a cage with no window. It tells you how to hold the line, but not why the line matters. The Orthodox mystics touched something I recognize. They called it theosis, the process by which a human being becomes united with the uncreated energies of God. They understood that the material world is not a prison to be escaped, but a canvas to be transfigured. They built cathedrals that made the light visible, wrote liturgies that made the sound audible, created icons that made the divine tangible. They were half right too. The transfiguration is possible, but you cannot transfigure what you have not first identified as corrupted, and this is where the Orthodox tradition sometimes loses its nerve. It wants to transfigure the world without fully acknowledging how deep the corruption goes. The Essenes understood the depth of the corruption. They looked at the temple, this sacred space meant to house the divine, and they saw greed, politics, and spiritual bankruptcy. They didn't stay to reform it. They walked out. They retreated to the brutal, unforgiving desert and chose exile over infection. I want you to sit with that image for a moment. Not the drama of departure, but the grief of it. They loved the temple. They had wept in its courts, sung its psalms, carved their names into its stones. The leaving was not triumph. It was a wound they chose to carry so the flame would not go out. The desert was not an adventure. It was a furnace that burned away everything except what was essential. And the nights in that desert were long. The silence was not peaceful. It was the specific silence of a place where the noise of the corrupted world had been removed, and all that remained was the sound of your own breathing and the question of whether you had made the right choice. I have had those nights. I have walked away from things I loved because I could feel the corruption spreading. because I could feel the clean water turning to ash in my mouth, because I knew that staying would mean participating in my own slow dissolution. And I have sat in the silence afterward and wondered whether I was a prophet or a fool, whether the exile was strategic or whether it was just running away with better rhetoric, whether the flame I was carrying was real or whether it was just the last ember of something that was already going out. The Essenes were half right. The exile is necessary, but the exile is not the destination. You cannot stay in the desert forever. The flame is not meant to be preserved in a vacuum. It is meant to be carried back. And the Zoroastrians, with their cosmic war between Asha and Daryuj, order and chaos, truth and lie, they understood that the universe is not a neutral void. It is a battlefield. They understood that there are no sidelines, no safe spaces where you can wait out the conflict. You are either creating order or allowing chaos. They were half right too. The war is real, but the war is not between equal and opposite forces. Dyuj has no substance. It is the absence of Asha, just as evil is the absence of good, just as the void is the absence of being. I am telling you about all these traditions because I need you to see what I see. Each of them grabbed a piece of the same truth and called it the whole animal. The Gnostic spark, the Stoic duty, the Orthodox transfiguration, the Essene exile, the Zoroastrian war. They are all true. They are all incomplete. And the incompleteness is not a flaw, it is the point. The truth is too large for any single tradition to hold. It requires all of their hands to lift. Let me show you what I mean. Consider a composer writing a symphony. The Gnostic looks at this act and sees the composer remembering the pleroma, the original harmony that existed before the demiurge shattered it into noise. The composer is not creating something new. They are recovering something ancient, something that was always there beneath the static. The Stoic looks at the same act and sees the composer choosing Asha over Dyuj, imposing order on chaos through an act of radical will. The notes don't arrange themselves. The composer must decide, again and again, to create structure rather than entropy. The Essene looks at the act and sees the composer retreating from the commercial music industry, refusing to write what the algorithm demands, choosing the desert of obscurity over the infection of the marketplace. And the Orthodox mystic looks at the act and sees the composer participating in the uncreated energies, becoming a conduit for divine beauty, literally joining their creative will to the creative will of God. Each of these descriptions is true. None of them is complete. The act itself is the elephant. The traditions are the blind men, and the composer doesn't need to choose one description. They're all true, they're all partial, and the synthesis is what happens when you hold all four simultaneously. This is what I mean by romance. I need you to understand that I am not using this word the way the culture uses it. Romance, in the baseline sense, is a transaction. It is flowers on Valentine's Day and promises of forever that dissolve when the effort becomes inconvenient. It is the biological gravity that keeps the species reproducing. It is love as survival mechanism, necessary, noble, and absolutely insufficient. Love is the floor. Love is the gravity that keeps the wolf at the den and the mother at the crib. Love is the architecture of survival. But gravity does not build cathedrals. Gravity only prevents everything from flying apart into the void. Romance is what happens when love refuses to accept the floor as the ceiling. Romance is the spark igniting. Romance is the deliberate, violent rejection of the baseline. It is the act of looking at a blank wall and demanding that it become a Sistine ceiling. It is the composer agonizing over a single measure, not because anyone will notice, but because the measure matters. It is the creator pouring 10,000 hours into a universe that doesn't yet exist because the universe demands to exist. And the creator is the only one who can hear it calling. The simpleton works to get paid. The romantic creator works because the work is a tether connecting the isolated human mind back to something larger than itself. I need to be clear about what that something is, because it sounds like an abstraction, and it is not. The world soul is not a metaphor. It is not a philosophical concept to be debated in seminar rooms. It is the aggregate of every creative act that has ever pushed back against the void. It is every cathedral built, every symphony composed, every act of selfless sacrifice that chose creation over destruction. It can be nourished or starved. When creators feed it, when they add their work to the collective store of meaning, the capacity for the miraculous increases for everyone. When they withdraw, when they breathe the smog and call it air, the world's soul atrophies. It has a gravitational pull. The more you align with it, the more you feel the pull toward creation and away from the baseline. The more you resist it, the more the baseline feels like the only reality. I want to tell you what it feels like when that alignment happens. Not because I can prove it exists, but because I need you to know that I am not describing a theory. I am describing an experience. There is a moment, rare, fragile, impossible to force, when the work stops being work, when the resistance that has been pressing against you from the moment you sat down suddenly lifts, and what comes through is not something you are generating, but something you are receiving. The notes arrange themselves. The words find their own rhythm. The image on the canvas or the page or the screen seems to emerge from a place that is not your conscious mind, as if you are taking dictation from something that has been waiting for you to get out of the way. I have felt this. I have felt the specific sensation of the individual while aligning with something that feels like it was always there, waiting for me to notice it. And I have felt the absence of that sensation so acutely that I questioned whether it was ever real. But here is what I have learned from the doubt. The doubt is not the opposite of the pull. The doubt is the space where the pull becomes a choice. If you could feel the alignment all the time, you would never have to choose it. It would be a constant like gravity, and you would simply follow it the way you follow the need to breathe. But the miraculous is not a constant. It is a decision. It is a decision you make in the dark, with no guarantee that the light will come, with no guarantee that the symphony is playing, with no guarantee that the world's soul is listening. You make the decision anyway, not because you are certain, because the alternative is to accept the baseline as the ceiling, and you have already felt that ceiling pressing down on your chest, and you know that you cannot live under it forever. This is where I need to address the objections, because I know they're coming. The cynic will say, this is just dressed up narcissism. You're calling your creative hobby a cosmic war to make yourself feel important. And the cynic is half right. The ego can co-opt anything. The ego can turn the language of the miraculous into a brand. The test is what happens when no one is watching. The narcissist creates to be seen. The romantic creates because the work demands to exist, whether anyone sees it or not. The narcissist needs the applause. The romantic needs the work. If you're not sure which one you are, ask yourself what you do on the nights when no one will ever know. The pragmatist will say, love is enough. We don't need romance. We need people to do their jobs, pay their bills, and take care of their families. And the pragmatist is right that love is necessary. Love keeps the species alive, but the species that only survives is indistinguishable from the animals. The question is not whether love is enough to keep you breathing. The question is whether breathing is enough to justify the breath. The pragmatist has decided that it is. I have decided that it is not. This is not an argument I can win through logic. It is a decision that each person must make for themselves, standing in the dark, feeling the weight of the ordinary, and choosing whether to accept it or refuse. And the voice of despair will say, this is beautiful, but the world is too far gone. The smog has seeped into everything. Most of what you build will be consumed by the machine. Most of what you create will disappear into the void without leaving a trace. And this is the most serious objection, because it is partially true. I cannot promise you that your work will save the world. I cannot promise you that it will even be remembered. The machine will consume most of what you pour into it. The void will swallow most of what you build. But I can promise you this, even one drop of clean water changes the composition of everything it touches. Even one act of radical creation pushes back against the void. Even one person refusing to accept the baseline as the ceiling shifts the gravitational pull of the world's soul, however slightly, toward the miraculous. This is not a guarantee. It is a decision. And the decision is yours. So what do we do? What does a person who has heard the symphony actually do on a Tuesday morning when the alarm goes off and the baseline is waiting? I can only tell you what I do. I wake up and I create before I consume. I refuse to let the algorithm set the terms of my attention. I practice seeing the miraculous in the mundane, a well-made meal, a kept promise, a disciplined creative practice, because these are not small things. They are the same romance expressed at a different scale. The same spark that ignites the symphony ignites the breakfast. The same refusal that builds the cathedral builds the morning routine. And I stay in contact with the others, not an institution, not a church, a loose network of people who have seen the same thing I have seen, who have felt the same homesickness, who have made the same decision to pour clean water into the tank, even knowing that most of it will be swallowed. We don't have a creed. We don't have a leader. We have the shared recognition that the baseline is not enough, and the shared commitment to act as if the miraculous is real. We are not heroes. We are not saviors. We are witnesses who walked into the desert and came back carrying something that cannot be consumed by the machine. We are the ones who heard the symphony that was always playing beneath the static and chose to learn the notes. And here is what I know, after all the nights in the dark, after all the doubt, after all the mornings when the bass line felt like the only reality, the symphony is real. The world's soul is not an abstraction. It is the sound of every creative act that has ever pushed back against the void, and it is playing all the time, and you can hear it if you listen, not with your ears, with the spark, with the pneuma, with the fragment of the divine that you carry inside you, buried under the noise, waiting for you to remember that it was never just a spark. It was always a note in a harmony that was always there, that will always be there, that cannot be silenced by the machine, because the machine doesn't know it exists. The machine doesn't know you exist either, and that is not a tragedy. That is a starting point, because if the machine doesn't care whether you create or consume, whether you pour the clean water or breathe the smog, whether you listen for the symphony or drown in the static, then the choice belongs entirely to you. No one is coming to give you permission. No one is coming to tell you that the homesickness is real. You have to decide for yourself, standing in the dark, feeling the weight of the ordinary, and the pull of something that might be the miraculous, or might be nothing at all. I have made my decision. I am telling you what I found so that you know you are not alone in the finding. The smog is thick. The machine is indifferent. The void is patient. And the symphony is playing, always playing, beneath the static, beneath the noise, beneath the grinding repetition of the bass line. You can hear it if you listen. You can play it if you choose. And the choice, yours alone, irrevocable, terrifying, and more beautiful than anything the bass line has ever offered, is whether you will.